Good morning to every one of you. The train says hello as well. It's very nice of it. This is our last lesson in this section, or part 5 of this study. We'll be in Matthew chapter 8. We'll be in Mark 4. Matthew 8, 23 through 27 to be exact. Mark 4, 35 through 41. And Luke 8, 22 through 25. We're going to use Matthew as our primary account and refer to Mark and Luke throughout this study on the last event of this busy day, or the last one we're looking at anyway, Christ's busy day. He stills the storm, calms the storm. The text that we just mentioned, they start the completion of that busy day. Started with the accusation from the Jews. It's going to end with Jesus going to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is what we're looking at here, as we'll see in verse 18. But before we get into that, I want you to think about a normal, natural storm that you have experienced at some point in your life. Even the most severe storm you've ever experienced in your life. Think about it for a second. What went on and the way it happened, and maybe things you heard or felt or saw. What are some characteristics of those kinds of storms that come to your mind? What's that? Okay, high winds.
Tremendous downpours of rain.
Thunder, lightning. Tornado. Waves. Dark clouds. Okay. Fear. What about the way it starts, maybe?
There's a build-up to it.
Okay, a build-up. Sometimes it can be a very quick build-up, but still a build-up. It's still got to get to you, doesn't it? The storm, wherever the storm is. It's actually, it's kind of, we don't usually think of it that way maybe, or not by instinct, but a storm is an actual thing that's moving and it has to get to you, so it builds up where you are as it approaches you. Doesn't it exit in a similar way, just in reverse? It dies down. It very rarely just stops, seems like instantly. The rain might stop quickly, but the storm is still going to pass over you, and it may not even be done when it seems like it's done. It may have a little bit more to go. Maybe a calmer storm may have a severe thunderstorm, and then once it is over you, then the lesser storm hangs around. Just keep those images and ideas in your mind as we look at a storm that occurred here on this occasion, on this day, this busy day, the end of this busy day. What about some other storms? Storms with quotation marks that people experience or face today.
Illness.
Okay, illness. Anger. Unemployment. That's a storm. That's a storm of life. What's that? Heartbreak. Death. Mourning, grief. All these things, yeah. And so many more. Human things, humanity, human life. So storms, literal and figurative, are guaranteed to happen in life. No matter what happens, those things will happen. Real storms and the figurative, the metaphorical storms in our lives, they are guaranteed to happen. So let's look at the scriptures here. When Jesus was involved in a storm, a regular, natural storm, that is. Matthew 8, beginning in verse 23, it says, "And when he got into the boat," I got to throw verse 18 in there. "Now when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side." Now we'll skip down to 23. "And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves, but he was asleep. And they went and woke him, saying, 'Save us, Lord, we're perishing.' And he said to them, 'Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?' Then he rose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And the men marveled, saying, 'What sort of man is this, that even winds and sea obey him?'" All right, I'll go ahead and read Mark's account as well. We'll just get the full picture here. Mark 4:35. "On that day when evening had come, he said to them, 'Let us go across to the other side.' And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep, on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing?' And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, 'Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?' And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, 'Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" Finally, Luke's account. There's a little extra tidbit in each case. Beginning in verse 22 through 25. "One day he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, 'Let us go across to the other side of the lake.' So they set out, and as they sailed, he fell asleep. And a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water and were in danger. And they went and woke him, saying, 'Master, Master, we're perishing.' And he awoke and rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased, and there was a calm. He said to them, 'Where is your faith?' And they were afraid, and they marveled, saying to one another, 'Who then is this, that he commands even winds and water, and they obey him?'" All right, so after Jesus got done telling the parables that we've looked at the last couple of lessons in Matthew 13, like we pointed out before, the chronology was not the focus of the Bible writers, and the gospel writers are no exception to that. So it's generally believed that the parables, when we put all the three synoptics together of Matthew 13, happened just before this. After he got done with that, Mark says it was evening on that same day, the day that we've been looking at in this part 5. He says, "Let's go on over to the other side. Let's move on to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, of the lake." Now, we were told already that they were at Capernaum, is where they had gone, where they were. So the other side would naturally lead us to assume the southern side, or maybe to the east. We learned from verse 28 of Matthew 8 that where they ended up going, where they were headed, was to the country of the Gadarenes, is what Matthew's account says. And that would generally be somewhere in that red circle. That red circle probably should be a little bit bigger than that, to be honest, but that's where they were going. So there's the path they were going to be taking across the sea, more or less. It has been said it would take a few hours maybe to make that journey. We're not talking about, little speedboats, but a fishing vessel of the first century. And you may think that by the language that Jesus was just trying to get away from the people, because one of the accounts at least said that when he saw that there was a crowd around him. But it has been suggested that there was really nothing more that Jesus could do or say to those people. He had been with them for a long time now, telling all these parables and teaching them. So what more could he do or say other than time to go somewhere else? It's time to move on. Let's go to the other side of the lake. Not just because he was exhausted and wanted to get away from the people, although we do learn from this that he was absolutely exhausted, because he had no rest pretty much, no break, no little breather, because people were constant. Everywhere he went, they would find out that he was there, and then they would be there. In fact, most of the time, they didn't even have to find out he was there. They found out he was going somewhere and were already with him before he even got there. And even now, we learn that some boats apparently followed them, even on the sea here, the Lake of Galilee. So they get to the end of the boat, and they start going across the lake. And it says that a great storm rose, but Jesus was asleep. The verb used there is in a tense that would mean he was sleeping. I almost think that paints the picture a little bit better. Jesus was sleeping. Here he is sleeping. This storm arose, and Jesus was sleeping. Now, sometimes it's difficult to sleep during a storm, even when you're in your own bed, comfy. But if you're on a boat on the sea and a storm's going on, it's going to be really tough, I would think. Can't speak personally, but I don't know if I'd be able to sleep even if there wasn't a storm going on. However, Jesus was sleeping. Interesting terminology here also about the storm. Matthew uses a word, Mark and Luke both use a word. They use the same word, that is the word for a whirlwind or a hurricane, that kind of terminology. Matthew uses a different word that is usually the word used for earthquake. It's the Greek word where we get the word seismic. Pretty much directly taken. Seismos is the word. A violent shaking or commotion. And it's interesting, that word is usually used for earthquake. And that's what was going on. It was a very severe storm, apparently. And storms were not uncommon on the Sea of Galilee, especially where it was situated. It was 680 feet below sea level, or below the Mediterranean Sea, surrounded by mountains. So these, winds and stuff coming over the mountains and going down onto the sea and all this cool air sweeping down, storms are going to happen. And that's what was happening here. And it says that the disciples became afraid. And we have to remember, a decent number of these disciples, at least 4 of them, were seasoned professional seamen. And they were panicking. And I don't know if that would have happened very often, because they were probably used. There's no way this was the first time they were out there in a storm. Just not. Does not stand to reason that this will be the first time this ever happened. But this time was different. And you can imagine whenever the boat is filling up with water, that's going to make you scared if you're in the boat. Okay? So, they were scared. Jesus was not scared because Jesus was sleeping. And we're going to see more on that in just a second, the fact that Jesus was sleeping. It says they went and woke him. And they probably woke him not, peacefully, but in an urgent panic, the way you would wake somebody in that situation. And they told him, actually, what did they tell him? Because all 3 accounts are different. Matthew's says, Save us, Lord, we're perishing. Luke's is pretty close to that. Luke says, his records, Master, Master, we're perishing. Mark's is a little more snappy and snippety and whatever else. Mark's account records this statement or question, rhetorical question. Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing? That one's got a little more attitude in it, doesn't it? A little sass. So which one did they actually say, do you think? Well, here's what I think. I think they said all of them and more. Several men, they're all going to Jesus, and I guarantee you they all had a word or two to say, all at the same time. And this is just a little sampling of what was said. Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing? This may not be fair, but I'm going to say that if that's a direct quote, that one had to have been Peter. That sounds like a Peter statement to me. Sorry, Peter, if you didn't say that. But that one sounds like something Peter would say. Or maybe one of the sons of thunder. We can't let them go, you know. They had a little spirit in them as well at times. A little heated attitude. Don't forget, they asked Jesus if he wanted them to burn a village down in Samaria because they wouldn't let them stay. Well, either way, it didn't appear that Jesus was very concerned because he was sleeping. Now, here's a more interesting question, I think. What did they expect him to do? Had they ever seen Jesus do anything whatsoever that would even remotely resemble making a storm stop? I think maybe in our minds, raising somebody from the dead would trump stopping a storm. But if you think about it, practically, when you're there, our human minds might think it would be easier to raise somebody from the dead than to make a storm stop that's going on around you. I mean, very huge. How could anybody even begin to stop it? Well, I don't know what they expected him to do. No more than I know what Mary expected him to do at the wedding feast when she said, hey, they've run out. That one is easier to maybe connect the dots than this. Master, hello, we're dying here. We're about to die, including you. You're on this boat, and this boat is in the middle of this storm, and we are unable. Clearly, they would have been fighting the as much as they could, but the boat was filling with water. And when a boat fills with water, it's only a matter of time until your boat is no longer a boat. It is an unintentional submarine.
But human nature follows the leader a lot of times. So he was the leader, and even if they couldn't even imagine what he could have done, even if they had no concept of what it is, him telling them what to do or him telling them, reassuring them or instructing, it could have been something as simple as that. Like, if anybody's going to save us, it's you. Like, you would know what to do. So wake up, let's go.
Yeah, they got to that point. Yeah. They tried all their things, I'm sure. We're not told that, but if they even could have tried all their, the protocol that they would start in that kind of situation, if they were even able to do that, they obviously would have done that. And now they're out of ideas. So he's their last resort, their last hope. Because if you remember in Jonah, whenever they were on that ship going to Tarshish and this kind of thing happened, and they kept trying everything they could possibly try. Even after Jonah said, this is my fault, my God, the God, is mad at me because I disobeyed him, and if you throw me off the boat, then this will stop. Even after that, they still kept throwing stuff off and trying and trying and trying. I'm sure they had done this, that whatever they could do, and now all they could do at this point was go to him and say, we're dying. We're doomed. Take it as you will, do with it what you will, but that's the situation we're in. And they were obviously baffled by the fact that he was asleep, which we get really from the quote from Mark. Do you not care? Well, what would that mean other than that has to be a direct reference to either the fact that he was asleep or the fact that he wasn't doing anything. Probably the fact that he was asleep. So, do you not care? Maybe more like, are you not worried about this? Does this not worry you? Are you not concerned here? Well, we know that he wasn't, obviously. But they couldn't understand how that could be. So, what did Jesus do?
When you think about something like that, if it's that bad, how's this guy sleeping through something like that?
Yeah.
That's the first question is, how was this guy sleeping still?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's a sign, one, of his exhaustion, and two, of his peace. Both of those things. He was so exhausted. Don't know how long it took him to go to sleep, to fall asleep, but we get the impression that, as soon as they had set out, he pretty much made his way over to the stern of the boat, the rear of the boat, where there was a cushion, one of the accounts says. On the cushion was apparently this low bench where the steersman would sometimes go and rest in normal circumstances. That's where Jesus was sleeping. It doesn't indicate that there was some sort of cabin or anything like that, even although that's what we might think of. But still, the one thing that we do get from their panic is Matthew's account when this says, "Save us." Now, what specifically they thought he was going to do, we don't know, but what they were hoping for, obviously, like anybody would in that situation, is for somebody to save them. Do something to save them. And they apparently thought that he would have an idea of how to do that. But what did Jesus do at this point? Well, in Matthew's, in either case, he spoke. Slight variation between Matthew and then Mark and Luke. Mark and Luke have Jesus rebuking the storm, and then he rebukes the disciples. But in Matthew's account, which we're using as the primary here, Jesus rebukes them. Matthew was the only one of these three writers who was on the boat. And whether he has Jesus rebuking the disciples first because he was there or because it impacted him more, we don't know. But it almost makes me inclined to think that Matthew's is the more exact order of how things happen. Either way, they would not have expected this, I don't think. Jesus rebukes them. I kind of like to think of Jesus rebuking them before he even stops the storm, personally.
Well, in verse 26 it says, "Then he arose."
Yeah, definitely seems to indicate time, intentional order when you put the word "then" in there. But yeah, think about the storm still raging around them, the waves. I don't know if you've ever seen a video of some of these like deep ocean liner things that are out there. I don't know what kind of human beings these people are. They can be on those things and you can hear them talking sometimes. I actually don't even like, it makes me sick to watch the video of it because of what it looks like. It's not natural to be out there in that. Now that was a huge ship that's different than this. But it's also a smaller body of water that wouldn't maybe reach the level of wave rising and falling. But imagine this storm raging around you on the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus, before he does anything about it, He rebukes them. Why does he rebuke them? And that's what this is a rebuke. Yeah. Lacking faith. Okay, again, Matthew's has little faith. Mark's says, I think it's Mark's, no faith. Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? And then Luke's says, where is your faith? Which would kind of imply no faith as well. So that's what they were rebuked for. But what did this have to do with their faith? Being scared of a storm equals lack of faith? What do you think?
They were with the Son of God. Like, they were with God Himself. They should have known that something should have been
Yeah,
okay.
I think that's probably number one. Look at all that they had seen Him do. Look at what they knew that He had been declared to be, who He was. And even if they didn't really understand exactly what He was coming to do, they knew that He was there from God and to do what God intended to be done. By now, they should have known, at the very least, that He's not going to die on the sea in a storm by accident, by some sort of freak coincidence of nature or something. Another thing that I can't help but see as maybe significant is the fact that He had already said, we're going to the other side. Let's go to the other side. And maybe they should have had enough faith in Him to know that if He says we're going to the other side, we're going to the other side. We're going to get to the other side. We're going to make it to the other side because I've got something to do on the other side. Wayne, do you have something?
Well, a lesson in this for us, look at the patience. He rebuked them, but look at the patience. He'd been with them for 3 years in His total ministry. And even after His resurrection, Thomas doubted. But then, their faith was increased. But not until then did their faith come to maturity. We meet people every day. We discuss religion with them. We discuss Christ. But we have to be patient and allow things to sink in over time. He didn't leave any of them. One forsook them, but He didn't leave them.
Yes, He is such a shining example of patience. He could have just laid into them. And it could have been a lot harsher than it was. He could have said, I am so sick of you people. As soon as we get to the other side, don't follow me. I'm going to keep going, and you turn around and go back because I can't handle it anymore. I can't take you anymore. Now, it may make more sense logically to us to picture Jesus rebuking them after He calms the storm. Either way, He did both. But the miracle that happened here was that He makes this storm stop. And that's what Matthew records next. Then He arose and He rebuked the winds and the sea. He rebuked the winds and the sea. Do you remember in our previous studies of the book of Esther when I tried to give a little snapshot of what her husband, eventual husband, the king of Persia, was like? His name was Artaxerxes, or Xerxes rather. And he was a terrible, terrible man. And one of the things, and he was a bona fide lunatic. And one of the things that he did on one occasion was he gave the sea a spanking because it tore up this pontoon boat bridge that he was trying to build across the Hellespont. And that was an example to show how crazy he was. That he rebukes the sea and gives it a spanking. Literally. Whips it, or has it whipped. He probably didn't want to hurt his dainty hands with a whip, but he had it whipped. But why don't we use this as an example to show that Jesus is crazy? He rebuked the sea and the wind. What kind of crazy person would ever do that? Yeah, here's the difference. He rebuked the wind and the sea, and the wind and the sea heard. Didn't really hear. It just stopped. Instantly. It stopped. The storm stopped. Now let's think about those characteristics we talked about at the beginning of how a storm builds up, and we know that's how this one would have built up. But this one didn't die down the way that a normal storm would die down. But Jesus said, "Peace, be still," and as soon as that word left his mouth, just like this, with the exception of the projector humming and there's no water sound going on. But you think about whatever normal sounds would be going on in the middle of the lake, a large lake like this, in the nighttime. Would have been nighttime by now. Instant. In fact, our lesson points out that there was sort of more a double, I don't know if I call it a double miracle, but a double edged sword here, because Luke indicates that wasn't just the wind that ceased, or the rain, or all the stuff above that we think of, but even the waves. Now, it's pretty much a scientific law that even if the storm stopped instantly, the waves are at least going to carry on for a little bit. And they will gradually, they'll get calmer and calmer. It may only take a few seconds, depending on how big they are. The bigger the wave, the longer the force is going to be moving. But in this case, Luke specifically points out that he rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased. Both of them ceased instantly. Yeah. Even better. Well, even better than I would did my mom and dad. Maybe, not you, maybe. Sorry. Didn't mean to offend you. But, yeah. Better than I did. The wind and the sea. Now, at this point, it almost, to me, makes more sense that he would have rebuked them first, because at this point, I don't know if they would have even been listening to anything else. Because he just blew their minds. And when somebody's mind is blown, you're going to have to give them a minute or two to get back to their normal activity. Yeah, they got to process, and they probably wouldn't ever process this. But their jaws you got to give them time to pick their jaws up off the boat. But either way, this had a huge impact on the disciples, as we can imagine. They had seen him do some amazing things. They had seen him do things that only God can do. They had seen him heal people instantly, countless times already at this point. They had seen him heal people by speaking and touching them, maybe by all sorts of, not even being in the presence of the sick person. They had seen him raise a young man from the dead. They had seen him cast demons out, and that was something that had an impact on them. He even commands the evil spirits, and they do what he says. So not only does he have control and authority and power over the physical, the lesser physical things we might call it, like illness and things like that, but he has power over the spirits of men because he can raise somebody from the dead. He also has control and authority over demons, because he can tell them what to do and they listen. But now we see he can even command the weather. and not just control the weather, like preventing a storm or something like that, but this one was already in full force, raging. And he told it to stop, and it was like flip as easily as we would, more easily, but as instantly as us flipping off that light switch. Just as easily as in the creation when God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. He says, "Stop. Be still." And everything was still. The wind, the rain, the waves, a great calm. They learned a valuable lesson that day, and the rebuke had to have helped. Not just the lesson they learned. They would have learned the same lesson without the rebuke, but probably not as powerful. Because they needed to know that he was not pleased with the display that they were showing in their lack of faith. But they learned what they already knew a little bit better that day. Jesus, we should learn from that same thing. Jesus did this. It's not a metaphor. It's not an allegory to show that Jesus has power. But there's no other language that any writer could use. If Matthew, Mark, and Luke were wanting to get to describe an event that actually happened, how would they do that? Well, how better could they do that than what they recorded? There's no better way. And that is a valid argument. If they wanted to record a historical, actual thing that happened, what kind of language would they use? How would they do it? How would they tell it? Well, this is exactly how they would have told. Just as straight, simple as can be. 4 or 5 verses each. No, overwhelming details or poetic language or beautiful prose. And barely any dialogue. Just the basic, as simple as it can possibly have been told. We ought to ask the same question that they asked. What sort of man is this? That's what Matthew's account says, and I like that language, the way that is said. What sort of man is this? Matthew, Mark, and Luke say, who then is this that can even command the sea and the wind and they obey? What sort of man is this? Well, we know the answer to that. And they thought they knew the answer, but as more and more they're realizing they don't really grasp who he is. Yes?
I think this is interesting because I think it has a huge impact on them because it's something he did for them specifically. They're not just watching him provide for other people. Even if he raised the dead, well, what's that got to do with me? That's their experience. But I guess this really hits home because he does it for them.
Yeah.
It affects them personally.
Yeah, he did it. And if you think about it, he didn't really have to. I don't think all of us would probably agree that they were safe from that storm. Don't you think? I think they were, even though it didn't look like it. And Jesus could have used that as a lesson, like, no, we're going to ride this thing out, and then you'll learn the lesson that if you're patient, that could have been a good lesson, couldn't it? Patience and trust and faith, and no matter how bad it gets, God will see you through. What a biblical and powerful lesson. But he didn't do that. He stopped it for them. Instantly.
When they asked.
Yeah, when they asked.
That's why he could sleep. And they should have known that that was not the manner of death he was going to face.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he said, "Ye of little faith." He's told them what to expect and when, basically.
Yep.
But they haven't understood. That's why he was upset with him. But even though physically he was exhausted and that would cause any of us to sleep, he knew the Father wasn't going to allow that to happen at that point.
Yes, and Jesus knew what he was there to do. They didn't really understand, but even what they thought he was there to do wouldn't have worked if he died out in the sea. So even they were mistaken about what they thought Jesus was coming to do. But even if they were right, they would have understood, well, this can't happen, because how's he going to establish the kingdom if he dies out here on the sea? And Jesus told them, I'm not sure if he has yet, but he will tell them multiple times soon, I'm going to go to Jerusalem, I'm going to be taken by the chief priests and the elders and the scribes and all these Jewish establishment, and I'm going to be crucified, put to death. I'm going to give my life. If they, whenever he told them we're going to go to the other side, you would think Jesus may have said, let's go to the other side, but by the way, we're not going to get to the other side because I'm going to give my life out here on the sea and we're going to die. We're all going to die together. If that's what he had expected, if that was the plan. But that wasn't the plan. The plan was to go to the other side. And he was asleep because he had no reason not to be. And he was exhausted. He knew the manner of death he was going to die and that he was going to do it willingly. So he didn't have to stop that storm. But he did. And he did it for them. Not to save their lives necessarily. It may be that the storm would have taken their lives if he hadn't stopped it. That is possible. But it's not necessary. It may be that he just stopped it because they wanted him to. They asked him and they were terrified. And he could have taught them a lesson either way, but this lesson, we assume, was the most powerful of the options, and that's why he went this route. And that element of it would have made it more added to its power and its impact, that he did this. We asked, and he delivered. In my Bible, the way I have it open here at this chapter, the very first verse on this page is, ask and it will be given to you. He just got done saying that not long ago. And while we understand that doesn't necessarily apply to every single thing that somebody could ask, God's not going to take somebody's life because we ask him to. But as a rule, it is true. God cares. He listens. He hears. And Jesus taught them that lesson here, as in addition to all these other lessons. Obviously, the first thing on their minds is going to be, Jesus just told the wind and the storm to stop, and it stopped. What kind of guy, what kind of man is this? Such a good question, because no other man can do that. Just like if you saw somebody fly away. What kind of man is that? Because I know that men can't do that. They saw a man stop a storm instantly at his word. What sort of man is this? Well, little did they know now, but they would eventually, even if they thought they knew, they would eventually come to understand he's the God-man. That's what kind of man he is. He's the God-man. And the Gospels invariably represent Jesus as being the God-man, the one and only God-man. Why was Jesus able to sleep? Well, I think we've hit that already. He's exhausted, but he's also God. Faith in the Father, maybe you could include in there. When he calmed the storm, he rebuked his disciples and called them men of little faith. We've looked at that in extended detail as well, I guess.
So thinking about that, like as someone who has a healthy appreciation for water, and you can just imagine, even if you are normally out there, this is a storm of something you've never seen before. Your initial reaction as a person like me, thinking of me, like I would be panicked about me, and when you have like a phobia or a fear, it's not necessarily that you are putting it all together about thinking about all these things you already knew. You're in like a dead panic. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? That's the snap out of it,
Yeah.
And so when he had a kind of a snappy response, I could feel like maybe he was panicked and he was not thinking what he should know. Even if you die, where's your soul? Calm down. Why are you panicked? You're dying. Because even if you're dead, but all these things that you see, the men of little faith, not believing him, how much of it could have been that sheer, we've never seen anything like this before, this is something bad, this must be, you forget yourself a little bit, and you forget to call on the one that you need, and when you did call on him, it was all done. So there's a lot of those that I feel can go along with that. If they had just sat there panicked and never thought, wake him up and ask him, they would have been panicked and terror-stricken the rest of the night, kind of
Yeah.
thing. You know, I mean, some of that's my human looking at it like, oh, that water coming in over the side. And they're like, can't we?
Yeah, you're not going to be thinking.
Without thinking of everything you've already known.
That's why you do drills, practice drills, because as soon as the emergency hits, you're not thinking the way you normally think. That's why they call it a panic, because you're not thinking clearly, usually, because what you're thinking about is, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. Nothing else enters your mind, or, you know, what are we going to do, what are we going to do? That's why you practice what you're going to do. It's here's the exits, here's what you do when this happens, so get it as much in there as you can. But they were not expecting this. They were not ready for this. And it was greater and stronger than they had ever experienced, it seems. And they were not in a good way. But they learned that panic with him in the boat, especially, was evidence of a lack of faith. They shouldn't have gotten that panicked, because rather than him being the last thing they went to, that he should have been the first thing. As far as, their faith was concerned. And that's what we should do too. Put our faith in him. Thought this was a good quote just to close us out here. With him there can be no difficulty, since all is his, and all may be ours, since he is in the ship. One thing only he wonders at, the shortcomings of our faith. And one thing only makes it impossible for him to help, our unbelief. So, with Jesus in the boat, we got nothing to fear. Literally. Because even if death does come, if Jesus is in the boat, it's still going to be okay. Everything's going to work out. If we're on his side, if we're with him, then yeah, that's the key. Jesus got to be in the boat. If Jesus is not in the boat with you, nothing can help you. And we should remember that as far as a church and as a Christian. Got to be with Jesus.